Welcome to our first ExL Academy of Spring 2026. Excited to have you all here. We're going to give it a moment for folks to log on. So in the meantime, just inviting you all to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. Say hello to any friends you see. I see some friends on screen. Great to see y'all. Welcome. If you are just logging on, we're going to get started in about a minute or two, but just giving a moment for all of our friends to log on. Excited to have you all here. This is going to be a really awesome academy. I'm very excited for this one, so happy to have you all here. All right, we've got folks from all across the state joining. I see Stockton, San Diego, Bakersfield. We also have some of our panelists today that are joining us from across the country. So it's not just California today. Reading, Salinas, Irvine, awesome. All right, well, I imagine more folks will be logging on over the next couple minutes, but we'll go ahead and get started. Feel free to continue to say hello in the chat and where you're joining from, but just happy to have you all here. For those of you that I do not know yet, my name is Heather Williams. I'm the Director of Policy and Outreach with the California After School Network. And we're really excited to co-host these Spring Expanded Learning Academies with the CDE Expanded Learning Division. Today is the science behind the quality standards for expanded learning. So as we do, we are going to just start with a mindful moment. It's only 10 a.m., but who knows how long you have been up, how your day has been. So I'll invite you to turn off your camera if that's helpful and just kind of get situated. Maybe you have been sitting for a few hours already and need to take a moment and stand. Maybe you just got a moment to sit down, so maybe sinking into that chair and just taking in a nice deep breath and letting it out. Just taking a moment to acknowledge how you are feeling in this moment. Were you rushing to get here? Were you asked to be here by someone? Your boss made you sign up and attend? Are you excited for the content to come? Are you looking forward to 2 hours where you get to just sit and receive content? However you are showing up right now, that is okay. But I do invite you to set an intention for the next 2 minutes. What would you like to get out of today? What would you like to contribute? For those of you that have been in any of our spaces before, you know we love a good interactive chat. So we're going to invite you all to share your wisdom, your reflections, your ideas. So just making a note of how you would like to contribute to the space today. And then I'll invite you to take maybe another deep breath or two. Just notice how your body's feeling. If you need to stretch anything out. Have you had any water today? Maybe you need to go grab some water. Just making a note of how you will take care of yourself in this space today. And as you are ready, just inviting you to come back on camera if you would like to join us on camera. We'd love to see all of your faces. Continue to say hello in the chat. Maybe drop in some emojis of how you're feeling this morning. And we are so happy to have you here. So we're gonna continue on. We are recording these sessions, so we're gonna start recording now. And the recording will be ready for y'all shortly. We usually post the final slide deck and the recording within 24 hours. Melissa on our team is so on top of it. It's usually posted quickly, but YouTube has been a little bit struggling. So we'll see. We're going to do our best to get the video up within 24 hours for y'all to have access to that. So just a quick update on today's agenda. In just a few minutes, I'm going to turn it over for our workshop session. It will be running from probably a little bit earlier than 10:15 to about 11:50. And if you've been in previous Academy sessions, you might be familiar with, like, normally we have breakout sessions at the end, either by region or topic. This topic is really exciting, and we actually opted to do a different format. So we'll be staying in the main space the whole time, and there will be a lot of opportunity at the end for interactive conversation with our panelists. So we're going to encourage you all to stay on till 12 if you can, and have time to engage with our wonderful speakers we've got today. And then we will end promptly at 12. All right, so we'll keep moving along. This is a shared learning space, and so just a few notes about how we hold the space. We do hope these feel more engaging, and even though we do have a great set of panelists that'll be talking and sharing content with you, we don't want to feel like it's just us talking at you for 2 hours. We do want it to be a collaborative space. And then also materials might be updated with content and resources that are lifted throughout the presentation. So you all might ask questions. We're like, oh, that's a great question. Let's make sure that gets added to the resources. So we do have a learning companion, which is a Google Doc, and that's been shared in the chat by Malia. Thank you. Everybody can access that. It will force copy and includes a space for you all to take notes. For security reasons, the full chat cannot be downloaded. So also, if resources and comments are shared in the chat, we'll go back and add those so that folks will have access to that later. And then the PDF presentation is a draft. It's linked in the learning guide for our reference, for your reference, but it may again be updated. And so that will be added to our website within 24 hours after the workshop, along with the recording. We also have 2 more academies next week. And so next Wednesday, data compliance and alignment, navigating CalPADS and PACE for expanded learning. So we have a few different folks from different divisions within CDE, including the expanded learning division, as well as school fiscal services and the educational data management division. So that'll be great if you're like, this new CalPADS thing, I don't know how to report. Come to that session. That will be super helpful. And then making ELOP work for your district, collaboration between program, finance, and leadership. And so Michael will be hosting kind of a live fireside chat with a few folks from a couple different districts, and really talking about how at the district level, district leadership can start to understand the opportunity that exists with ELOP and how that supports what they're trying to do in their district. So we want our districts to understand the benefits of expanded learning and how to leverage that to support their kids. So those will be 2 great topics coming up. And with that, I think we're going to jump into the science behind the quality standards for expanded learning. So I am going to be turning it over to Michael Funk, who is going to introduce the really lovely and wonderful panel of human beings we have with us today. So, Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Heather. Beautiful introduction and setting, context, grounding, everything. Just a quick plug for the workshop next week on making ELOP work for your district. We've constantly heard people talking about how do I communicate what's possible to the chief business official at my district or my superintendent. And so I've been working to get superintendents and chief business officers on the academy to speak to their vision and excitement and how they go about one comprehensive program. And so that's going to happen next week, and I'm very excited about that. Today, I have been thinking about this for months and anticipating this for months. Just a little bit of context and background. The panel we have today, we're extremely fortunate to have these individuals who are not only uh, experts, have not only had their sleeves rolled up and been working on these issues that we all care about for the well-being of our young people for decades. They have a touch point and experience with expanded learning, and they care. And I'm so excited to have these humans with us today. A little bit of context about the youth development framework. I was in the early 90s in San Francisco, had just started a small community-based nonprofit organization that would eventually become one of the beacon centers in San Francisco. Um, and Deb's going to talk more about this, but everyone was talking about these kids that are causing trouble and how do we keep these kids from causing more trouble and how do we keep these kids from getting pregnant and on and on and on about these problems. And that's not how we approach the work. And so I can't remember how it came about, but it was the Community Network for Youth Development, and they showed me this youth development framework. And the first time I saw it, it was like, wow, this is how I believe, this is how I approach the work. And even like this is who I am, to see these young people as assets and strengths. And it was a big moment for me, um, to see that there's a framework that backs up and research that backs up what I believe. And when we went to create the quality standards for expanded learning in 2014, we asked CAN to put together a statewide group. And one of the things that I just said, the first condition is that these quality standards have to reflect the positive youth development framework. And that has to be the foundational component. And of course, um, that was an easy lift for CAN because they're passionate about that. But then, we started emphasizing the quality standards, putting the quality standards as the basis for all of the work plans that districts had to fill out, the basis for applications for 21st century funding, after school education safety program funding, the basis for what districts have to respond to when they fill out their expanded learning opportunities program or ELOP plan. So quality standards are continuous improvement process. CQI was based on the quality standards. Well, in the last couple of years, I was invited to participate and give some feedback to a process by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, who had convened a work group chaired by Deb Moroney from the American Institute for Research to talk about the future of youth development. And cut a long story short, last October I was at the National Academies at the invitation of Deb, and was at this meeting to unveil this wonderful volume of the future of youth development. And I remember during the course of that day, listening to speakers, participating, understanding, and going back and believing that we have to get back to help people understand what's foundational to our quality standards, that there is deep research behind these quality standards, and there's a body of work that we can stand on and need to stand on more clearly and articulate more clearly to other people in K-12 education, because we have a research-based practice. And so that was as I was flying home from DC, we got to get back to the basics with the youth development framework. And so when we started to think about what kind of topics are we going to have for the Spring Academy, it just came to me very quickly. I got to get Deb and some of her team here to do the to do the science behind the quality standards. And so with us is Deb Moroney from the American Institute for Research, and Sandi Simpkins from UC Irvine, and Horatio Blackman from the National Urban League. And I'm excited to have them, and I'm going to invite them. I've asked them to introduce themselves to you. You can hear their voice, and to take 2 or 3 minutes to give their own after school story. So, Deb, turn it to you.
Thanks so much, Michael. And so many of your memories align with mine that I'm just honored to be here and share this time and space with all of you. So uh, I am Deb. I live in Chicago. I'm what my husband calls a townie. I live a few blocks from where I grew up. And in fact, I live about 5 blocks from Stevenson Center, which is a community center that I attended in the 1980s. I don't know how many of you might have been around in the 1980s, but for those of us who did, it was common to be, and not questioned, to be alone after school. So there's some terms called like latchkey kids. I didn't actually have a key around my neck, but we went or had the opportunity and the rich assets here in Chicago to go to these community-based drop-in centers. So they were not necessarily structured, but you could go in after school. You could, pick up a floor hockey game. You could play basketball. You could do a craft, or you could hang out outside and talk to the near peer who was running that center. And that was available for a variety of different reasons that I'll talk about later until you were 13 years old. And then once you were 13 years old, they said, yeah, we don't really want teenagers hanging around here in that way, for all the reasons Michael said. And some very kind, in retrospect, staff member offered me an apprenticeship to work at that center, because I think that person realized, his name was Donald, that if I wasn't going there, I don't have siblings. My mom was a full-time, she worked for the state. She was a full-time working parent. I would be alone. And so that really started, I didn't know it then, but it started my career in after school. And I ended up running that center over time. I ended up working in the broader entity that housed those community centers. I went back to school at one point to say, hey, I think I need to know a little bit more to do this job well. And then I went back to school again to say, during a time of the era of accountability, when programs like ours were being asked to really demonstrate our value. And I said, you know what? I don't think we're doing this right, or I'm not exactly sure what we should be doing. So I went back to school yet again and found myself at the American Institutes for Research. I think one of the most pieces I have the most gratitude for is that my son, who's now 20, said to me recently, Mom, I think we're in the same field. And just like me, he started out at a Y. he was hired on at that Y. He's now the head of the leadership core, which is, really sort of the training program for upcoming youth workers at the Y. So not only is it my business, but now it's a family business. So I also, really feel family here. I've had the privilege of working with many folks on this call over time. So even though I'm a Chicagoan, I feel honorary in California, and so pleased to be here with all of you today. And thanks for all the hearts. I'm loving them. And with that, I'll pass it to my colleague Horatio.
I thank you, Deb, for kicking it over to me and Michael for inviting us to be here with you today for the next hour and a half or so. My name is Horatio Blackman. I am the Vice President of K-12 Policy, now with Education Reform Now, formerly was with the National Urban League for about 5 years. My work spans research, policy, advocacy. Really find myself loving being in the translational space. So really trying to understand what the research is saying and moving that into effective policy and good practice, both in the out of school time space and also in the more traditional K-12 space. I'm from Albany, New York, but I currently live in Hillsborough, North Carolina, which is about 15 minutes north of Chapel Hill. I moved down here about 2 years ago with my wife, and at the time we had one kid. Now we have two. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-month-old at home. Um, this work is just, as it is with most people, I'm sure, in this room, is just really personal to me. And so the story I want to share with you about my expanded learning after school, out of school time experience is kind of reflects on what Michael was talking about. I was born in '87, so I was one of those '90s kids, early thousands kids. And in Albany, New York at the time, there were really no real systems for after school out of time. There were really no programs. Everything that was kind of run was, run through a small community-based organization. In my case, it was my church and specifically 3 or 4 men, including my father, who passed away last year, to run a tutoring program down the street from our high school. I went to Albany High School, the city's high school. And it was open to any and all youth in the area. Like I said, it primarily served the high school just a few blocks away. And, one of the things that, I reflect on today, and I'll talk about more when I have a chance to present some of my slides, is what that program and those adults in that space really embodied. And some of those quality standards that we now know really drive outcomes were there for us. And, it was the safe, supportive environment. We knew the rules going in. We had an opportunity to shape some of the rules of engagement of how we were going to show up in the space. We knew the adults cared about us. I mean, every one of us being high schoolers, we knew that they were doing this pro bono, right? They weren't getting paid for this work, and they were showing up because they knew that there was a gap in what the young people in my community had access to and were receiving. They showed patience with us. A lot of my peers were really struggling. This was mostly around math. I mean, we literally had ninth, 10th, and 11th graders still doing math on their hands, right? Counting, struggling with basic math. So they really understood the gap in achievement that was there in our community. But they used strength-based language, right? They always were supportive of us and really tried to ensure that, we could build that resilience and persistence that would carry with us into our lives and, gave us opportunities to explore our culture and the learning. And, they also tracked our outcomes and celebrated our successes with us. And so, that experience and, the dedication, but the really thoughtfulness and, structure that they brought to that program, really stuck with me. And that really, made it easy for me when I was thinking about the trajectory of my work and my career, and that I wanted to do K-12 education work, but I also wanted to be in that school time space, and I wanted to see how those two things could link and speak to each other. And so, I'm really excited just to be here with you today to talk about some of the science behind these quality standards, but really to unpack some of this for you and what it looks like in practice, what it can look like. So thank you again, and I'll turn it over to my colleague Sandi.
Thanks, Horatio. Hi, everyone. My name is Sandi Simpkins, and I'm also excited to be here today. It's an honor to talk to you guys. I'm a Southern California native, so I saw somebody from Temple City. I grew up around there. I'm in Irvine now. I went to grad school, undergrad at Santa Barbara, grad school at Riverside. So I've been a lot around the Southern California area. Um, Now I'm at UC Irvine. I've been a professor here for 10 years. I've studied after school. I'm going to date myself here. I was born in the 70s, but I've been studying after school for over 25 years, so a long time. I'm a diehard. I published over 100 articles in after school in different journals and things like that. I love talking about after school. One of the things we do here at Irvine is that we have a certificate program for the undergrads. And so I teach classes where they work in after school activities in the area. And we actually, I don't know if I told you guys, yep, that we actually use the California after school standards in all my classes. And so the students, when they're in the programs, they look at how the program's doing in terms of the 12 standards and everything. So this stuff is near and dear to my heart. If you take a peek at some of the research I've done, again, I'm a diehard, so I've looked at, how does participation change from when kids are little all the way to 12th grade? I've looked at the predictors, access, looked at outcomes, looked at experiences in activity. How do we think about diversity in activities? How do we best serve all the different youth that are out there? So that's sort of me. And so, but I also want to say, I'm a person and I'm a mom. And so I participated as a kid in after school activities. I was more of an arts kid. So I did a lot of dance, I did a lot of painting, drawing, those kinds of things. I don't use those things so much in my everyday work right now, but it did shape me a lot as a person and thinking about how to be creative, thinking about a lot of the workforce skills or soft skills or things like that. I think what's really shaped me for after school is seeing how after school has shaped my kids. So like Deb, we actually have kids similar ages. My kids, I just became an empty nester. Both of my daughters are in college. So Horatio, it's great. You got a little bit of ways to get there, but it's great. And for one of them, she's studying animation in college, and she did art activities and swimming the entire way. The other one is doing something totally different, but I can see what she's learned in after school. I can see what after school has done for them in terms of their relationships, in terms of failing at something and learning to pick themselves up and try it again. That they've learned so much in after school that they just frankly didn't learn in the classroom. And so I just can't speak highly enough for after school activities and what everyone in this webinar is doing for all of our kids out there. And then the other way I've been involved in after school activities is when I was a grad student at UC Riverside. I ran an after school program for elementary school kids, and we had undergraduates were the staff, and just to see these kids, and this is old school. I mean, it was in the 90s, so it was like really elementary computers, think like Minecraft looking kind of games but they had so much fun working with the kids, the both sides, right? Like the undergraduate students and the youth. It was just such a wonderful experience for both of them. So I think that was the first thing that really got me excited about after school. And then seeing what it's done for my kids, and all the research has really just solidified how important this stuff is that all of you do every single day. And I know it's hard work, but it's so important. So.
Thank you, Sandi, and thanks to all three of you for giving us just a bit of your humanity today. And Horatio, my apologies for not getting your organization correctly. And I'm also sending you energy due to the age of your children. You are practicing youth development every day, and just thank all of you for being here. So I want to encourage everyone to, as questions pop into your head, if the panelists might say something or share something that you want more clarification on or something, the California School Network staff is going to be monitoring the chat and keeping track of questions. And once the next 45 minutes or so is over and we get through the slides, then we'll have a chance for cross discussion and also getting questions from you and wanting to make this meaningful and purposeful to you. So with that, Deborah, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. And even though Sandi and Horatio, I've known you for a hot minute, it was great to hear your stories. My goal by the end of the session is to learn what that means. I'll wait. I'll wait. But I'm pleased to kick us off here today to talk about this wonderful study that we all had the privilege to contribute to called The Future of Youth Development, Building Systems and Strengthening Programs. As Michael suggested, this was a study that was commissioned by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, whose role it really is to provide unbiased, nonpartisan information to inform policy. And when funders or other actors are interested in gathering that evidence to ultimately inform policy, the National Academies takes it on themselves to put together a diverse panel of experts ranging from researchers to policy experts to practice leaders. You happen to get the researchers here on your panel today, but we were really a diverse panel who came together for 2 years to look at the most up-to-date research on youth development in out-of-school time. The study was sponsored by the Wallace Foundation, who was really primarily interested in understanding updates to the evidence, and specifically updates to the evidence to a volume that was published over 20 years ago, Community Programs to Promote Youth Development, that really was foundation setting. And I think Horatio is going to talk about this a little bit more later, to a lot of the practices that underpin our quality standards in states across the country. So I think that's kind of important context there. And with that, I will get into the meat of it a little bit, introducing the study and what we covered. So you already heard from all of us our out of school time experiences. I just want to clarify that I'm using the term out of school time as an umbrella term to mean after school, expanded learning opportunities, which, as I know, the common frame in California, summer programs, although there's another report on summer, so we didn't cover it as much in this volume. And we're talking about youth development as the framework that underpins programs that happen outside of the school day. Certainly, youth development can happen in schools. We really hope it does, and in other settings. But we focused on the kinds of settings that you see here up on the screen. And I wanted to just do a little interactive activity in the chat. So you heard that I went to a drop-in community or rec center. You heard that Horatio attended a tutoring program and Sandi did arts. In the chat, if you can recall an experience of your own, so not the one you're potentially working in now, but when you were a young person, if you did, where and how you attended an out-of-school time program. I would love to see that in the chat while we're talking a little bit, because I think it really shows the diversity of program types that are out there and why a framework or having an underlying framework is important. So, okay, good. I was like, oh, it's kind of quiet. So they're coming in, they're starting to come in. And I'm so glad we started out with a church youth group. Spiritual places of worship and spiritual organizations are, like Horatio attended, really very common settings for out of school time. We're seeing scouting, which is mentioned up here, and so many of us participated in. I always love this time of year. We just finished cookie season here in my community. Oh, Love Girls Inc. They're coming in fast and furious. So as you can see, we have a really wonderful and diverse field that enriched all of us and continues to enrich young people every day. And in order to do that well and to have it be quality, it's really important that we have an underlying framework or set of agreements about what makes those programs good. And on the committee, we made a really intentional decision not to try to put a somebody might be need to mute. We were really intentional and had, the question was asked of us, should we name it? Should we say it is called out of school time? It is called after school. It is called expanded learning opportunities. And we really, as a committee, agreed that everything that you're naming in the chat, all of that diversity, what you attached to, what your families thought was good for you, was contextually and relevant to where you were, and that there is no benefit in trying to make universal some of this language. But what was important to be universal was the youth development framework that underpins the work. So thank you for sharing. When I'm not speaking, I'm going to really look and see the diversity of places that you all participated in. I saw many out of the corner of my eye and could super relate. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So that's what we're talking about. And how did we get here? So if you have the chance to read the volume, and of course we really welcome you to do so, but it's lots and lots of pages. There's a really full history of youth development and out of school time that goes back to the turn of the century. We're not going to start there. We're going to start maybe to our more recent memory and what Michael and I, and then later Horatio and Sandi were referencing. So in the 1980s, there was a political or policy movement called the War on Drugs. It was kind of this era of just say no, telling young people to just say no to drugs and smoking and sex. And I don't know if you've met any teenagers, but having just gotten through the teenage years in my house, just say no doesn't super work. And the evidence on that certainly demonstrated that even with like lots and lots of resources and support put into programs that really supported organizations like ours to tell kids to just say no, it didn't work. Interestingly, it did work with smoking. There's a lot we can talk about there, but it didn't work with the other aspects of risk. Also, of course, unsurprisingly, we found that the way that the country and those policies were treating risk were racist and targeted at certain young people and not others. And there were these publications put out like A Nation at Risk, campaigns like DARE that were really not strengths-based. They were really deficit-based and looked at young people, particularly adolescents, as with the potential to be in harm's way or cause harm. And so I mentioned my experience in a community center. I wasn't going to be able to go there once I was over 13 unless I was working there. That was very much in response to that philosophy. In the 1990s, we continued to progress with this sort of idea, and we're catching up to Michael's experience, where another report came out called A Matter of Time, which really started to explore and elevate the benefits of out-of-school time programs for young people through 18. And also, of course, welfare reform happened, which propelled or catalyzed many more mothers into the workforce because subsidies were only available to those mothers who were working. So it created a greater demand for programs after school, and there wasn't an assumption that a parent would be home. And of course, at that time, the assumption was that mothers in particular would be home. So we kind of went back, and some really great researchers, in fact, on your side of the country, said to themselves, there's got to be something that would work. How should these programs look if these just say no programs aren't working? There's a few here and there. And of course, guess who knew? Practitioners knew. They knew that strengths-based approaches that included families, that were culturally and contextually relevant, that promoted relationships, worked well. But it wasn't anywhere in the research to drive policy. So a group of great researchers did a meta-analysis, which is a study of studies. They looked at a compilation of all those studies of those programs that weren't working so well. They pulled the ones out that were working, and shocker, they found the ones that worked had those components again of being strengths-based, supportive of families, culturally and contextually relevant, and fostered positive relationships. That study, that kind of foundational study that came out of the Washington, really compelled the National Academies of Sciences to do this report that you see on the screen that I referenced, community programs that to promote youth development. And that study really brought together the developmental science from lots of different fields. We didn't have a lot of research in our field yet. So it brought together a lot of different studies and said, again, what the components of high quality programs were. And I won't steal Horatio's thunder. He'll talk more about that. So we come out of that era with a lot of better information on how to design programs. And then we hit like a truck hitting a wall. That's a terrible metaphor, but we hit No Child Left Behind. And suddenly, not only are we getting lots of dollars to improve and implement these programs, but we're also being asked to assess them. And the combination of No Child Left Behind with our better understanding about what constitute equality in these programs really gave us the plethora of information that we have today. Sandi, what did you say? You've done 100 studies? Yeah, there's a lot more information now, thanks to Sandi and Horatio and others and all of you who enter your data into CalPads and things like that, that help us really much better understand. We now have the science behind what a high quality youth development experience looks like. So with that, we'll go to the next. And I'll say it again, but I wanted to put it on a screen. What are the real kind of foundational tenets? And this is not a surprise to anyone here because this is what you do and support every day. But one, it's a strengths-based program. It's a program that is not focused on solving a potential problem, but it's a program, and not to say that interventions aren't important. You know, we know there's a lot of challenges we're all dealing with in the world, but that's something a little different. So these are strengths-based universal programs open to all who would benefit that are driven by the local community's assets, interests, and needs. We know they're foundationally safe and supportive. And of course, we mean having everything from having a fire extinguisher to being emotionally supportive and inclusive, and having those supportive relationships that I think every single one of us mentioned as a part of our after school story, but that those relationships can no longer be accidental. I just was so lucky that Donald identified that I might need a little something more, but everybody needs a Donald. And I think we were able, through the research and of this version of the National Academy study, to really dive into that and understand that intentionality. And of course, all of this happens in families and communities. We are not saviors doing something as families cannot. We are not parachuting into communities. We are in partnership with what families and communities want to elevate for their children. So with that, we'll go here. And of course, none of this happens in a vacuum. This is one of our visuals from the National Academy study because it's, as advertised, this is about the science. We love a complicated ecosystems model. We couldn't publish it without it. That's a joke. But we really wanted to recognize that out-of-school time providers, all of you work in the context, of course, we've already talked about with families and schools and communities, but with other services, of course, that complement what is going on. A lot of us are talking about the mental health crisis right now. We as youth work professionals cannot do it alone. We have those partnerships with our local community healthcare providers, hospitals, social workers. The child welfare system has been one of my greatest partners here in Cook County and Chicago, where for many, many years I ran out-of-school time programs for young people in the foster care system, our Parks and Rec system, and I'm sure in California you have a beautiful, wonderful, complicated net of supports for out-of-school time. And so this is also recognizing, and this was kind of a new finding, so to speak, that this complicated coordination is really bolstered so significantly by intermediaries, those organizations like CAN, like our hosts here today, who bring us all together to coordinate on behalf of individual young people, but on behalf of all of you to provide training and supports and data and evaluation and policy and advocacy. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention here that out of the report, this was really one of the most significant advances in the field in the last 20 years. And so I'm just going to do like a tiny little preview of the importance of out of school time programs. They play a positive role in a young person's development. Young people develop with or without us. So this is a piece of that puzzle, of course. They serve as that bridge in those complicated ecosystems. They provide safe and structured environments. Here in Chicago, we've been really needing those safe places, those safe houses recently. And so this is really that foundational safety in addition to the emotional and inclusive safety that I talked about before. I call this the fun box. They provide obviously a chance to engage in meaningful opportunities, to engage in relationships, learn new things, develop skills. And just going back to our history as booming during welfare reform, they still support parents and families when young people are outside of school and providing a safe and enriching place to go. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Sandi that when these ingredients are there, Sandi's going to tell you about how kids benefit. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the outcomes that we discuss in the book, in the report. And then I'm actually going to show you a little preview of a paper I'm currently working on. And so, but let me know if, again, like I'm a nerd. I spend a lot of time studying this stuff. So if you have questions on other outcomes or other things, or I know in the chat, like there was people talked about all different kinds of activities, like we're having a whole swim, what stroke did you swim discussion in the chat, which is great. So if you want to know by type or those kind of things, just give a shout out and let me know. So I'm going to talk to you about the outcomes associated with youth participation in a range of organized after school activities. And it's in chapter 7 in the book. And we covered a lot. So that's just fair warning. And it's largely my fault, but we covered a lot of different outcomes. And so we talked about social and emotional learning. We talked about youth identity and culture, civic engagement, also political engagement as part of that. We do discuss academic success. We talk about prevention in terms of violence, substance abuse, other risky behaviors. We talk about physical, mental health, family peer relationships, and long-term outcomes. And we also looked at, I want to underscore, it was one of the debates that we had, but like, do we focus just on kids and adolescents? So we actually talk about all elementary, middle school, and high school students in here. Depending on the outcome, some outcomes are more likely to be studied among children or some among adolescents, but we did cover the range. And we did, as Deb talked about at the beginning, talk about all different kinds of activities, not activities in the summer, but we looked at the full range of activities. Next slide. The first couple slides I'm going to talk about is looking at where did we see more effects. And so when I say where did we see more effects, we actually, with the help of a couple organizations, reviewed hundreds of studies that were out there on these various outcomes and looked across to see what patterns are we seeing across these in these different domains. So one of the strongest areas where we saw the most outcomes, this is not going to be surprising, is in social emotional learning. So I'm talking about things like persistence, sense of responsibility, positive work ethic, social skills, self-control, pro-social behavior, and civic engagement. So in all these cases, and if you could hit the next slide, because then a more detailed conclusion will pop up. In all these cases, that youth who participated in activities across a range of activities were more likely to see positive outcomes in all these areas compared to youth who didn't participate. Or some of the studies also looked at how much time, like how many days of the week or how many days in a month do youth participate? And more days typically meant higher outcomes. So if you have a youth who went to swimming or scouts or some of these, that they were more likely to show higher persistence on tasks, like they keep trying, they keep putting in more effort over and over versus kids who spend less time or don't go to those kinds of activities. Two things, so this is great, right? So regardless, and when I was talking about my story, I don't do things with art right now, but a lot of these types of skills that I learned in activities help me today. They help me today. They help me to be a strong student. They help me to be strong in the workforce. Also, persistent in parenting, I would say, is an important skill. And so these I think this is where after school really, really shines. And so we were excited to see this. And 2 caveats I would add, and you can see it in the text, that's our official long conclusion that's in the report, is that we were more likely to see these outcomes when the activity was high quality and when they were also designed to focus on these things. Like they were intentional about focusing on persistence or intentional in focusing on self-control. Next slide. So everyone, I feel like, wants to know about academic outcomes. I know it's really critical for a variety of reasons. This is where, and I'm going to say more about academic outcomes in a few minutes, but we did find participating in activities, a range of activities, was related to a range of academic outcomes, like their interest in school, their engagement at school, their attendance at school, whether they graduate high school, and whether they attend college. These are all key academic outcomes. And they all, when you look at like motivations theory, interest, engagement is real important to get the grades, the test scores, them learning in the classroom. We did find, as you'll see there on the bottom left, less consistent findings for grades and test scores. I'm going to talk more about this in a few minutes, so I'm just going to put a pin in that for right now. But generally, we found more consistent findings for social emotional outcomes, and we did find some strong outcomes for in the academic domain, but less so for grades and test scores. Next slide. Now, one of the some of the outcomes I haven't put on a slide yet is we found when you think about prevention and physical health, we found mixed results there. So it really depended on the focus of the activity. And there just frankly aren't that many studies on physical health. There's a fair bit when you look at athletics or sports and BMI or other indicators of physical health, but there just aren't that many. And then again, you can see on the right in terms of after school in general, I would say, I'm in a school of education, so there's lots of people in my building who study classrooms. I feel like the literature on schools is huge compared to after school. And so there's a lot of areas like youth mental health. There's a fair bit on depression, but not about self-esteem or about loneliness or self-worth or some of these other issues. Families, we know activities benefit families, but people just haven't studied it as much. Same with peer relationships. And we're starting to get more on long-term outcomes. Some colleagues and I are publishing a lot of papers looking at how participating in activities is related to getting arrested less often at age 26. It's related to how far they go in terms of education at age 26. And it's also related to how prestigious their job is at age 26. So we're starting to come out with this stuff. But by the time of the report, when we were reviewing, it's just, the literature is just quite limited in terms of mental health, long-term outcomes. And so I think we have, as a field, we have a ways to go. 2 things I want to underscore. Across all these outcomes, that we were more likely to see an association between how much time a youth spends there and these outcomes when the program was intentionally trying to promote whatever the outcome was, right? So we're more likely, take civic engagement. We're more likely to see an association between participation in activities and civic engagement if the activity focused on civic related activities. And I should tell you from my research, we actually see that middle school, high school participation relates to adults' leisure activities. So if they're volunteering in middle school, high school, they're more likely to volunteer at age 26. If they do art activities in middle school, high school, they're likely to engage in those activities at age 26. So we do see these content specifics links, right? So when you're thinking about designing your program, think about what are the outcomes that you want to promote, and then making sure you're intentional about promoting those through the curricula and things you do in the activity. And then second, which I'm not going to say a whole lot because I know Horatio is, but quality is key. And we know this. And unfortunately, there's not that many studies that look at it. But when they do, we know that it is really critical. Next slide. So I wanted to say a few words about academic outcomes because I know those are really important for everybody, parents, kids, all the stakeholders involved. One of the things that I'm doing now, Deb mentioned a meta-analysis. And that's where we go in and we actually look at published studies and look at, do we see patterns across multiple published studies? And so we're in the middle of doing one right now. We're looking at kids' participation in after-school activities and various academic outcomes. And we're looking at attendance, grades, test scores, and educational attainment. Next slide. And so what we've done is we reviewed 2,251 studies. Reviewed all of them. These are studies that are published in journals, also dissertations that were published between 2007 and 2024. And from those over 2,000 studies, about 117 focus on the indicators that we're looking at on kids' participation in kids' participation in activities and those 4 academic outcomes. And across those 117 studies, we have over 300,000 youth who are involved across those studies. So then what we do is we look at each of those 4 outcomes. And on each of those 4 outcomes, we have 10 to 70 studies that have looked at those links. Next slide. Okay, so these are called effect sizes. Like, for example, I'll go to years of education. The effect size is 0.39. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to interpret that on the next slide. But you can also think of it as percentile gain. So if they're participating in an activity, they have like a 14 percentile gain in their years of education. And the higher the bar, the bigger the effect. And we have significant effects for participating in activities related to grades, related to test scores, and related to years of education. With attendance, it's marginally, it's just almost significant, but it's not quite there. So let's go to the next slide and I'll tell you how to interpret these a little bit more. So, and hit the next slide because there's animation, I think, on this. Okay, so I'm going to talk about test scores for a second. So we have an effect size of 0.19. So if they're participating in activities, that means they have a 7 percentile gain in their test scores, which is big. But how big is that, right? How do you compare that to? And so I put a few comparisons up there. When you think about the effect of free universal school breakfast, that has an effect on test scores of 0.09. So ours is larger for activities. When you think of intensive tutoring programs, the intensive programs that only focus on academic, right, indicators and academic skills, their effects are 0.28 to 0.42. So it makes sense that ours is a little bit smaller at 0.19. But for me, this is across all different kinds of activities. It includes athletic activities and some of these others. And then when you look at like how much does a child gain in test scores across a normal year, that's that last line, it's 0.35 to 0.50. That includes everything. That includes development, school, families, activities, every single thing that they're doing. And ours is getting close to half of that for activities on test scores. So meaning that these effects that activities have matter. And they matter. Now, why did we see a different thing than the report? I think it's because of the kinds of studies. This is a much broader review, and we're statistically analyzing the data, quantitatively analyzing it, versus in the report, we focus more on experimental studies. So they're slightly different. Next slide. And so the last thing I wanted to mention that we talk about a lot of things in the report, and some of the things that continue to be key issues that are important for those outcomes for youth, right? That we're doing this for the youth, we're doing this for the families, and to get those outcomes for them, we need to continue to think about participation and access. We need to continue to think about the OST workforce. And then, as you're going to hear all 3 of us say, that we need to think about program quality. And so with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Horatio to talk about program quality.
Thank you, Sandi. That was wonderful and a great tee up for me. Just going back with my young kids, yes, I am practicing youth development all the time with them. I'm also very tired, so bear with me. I'm going to talk about program quality, the engine driving outcomes. Deb talked a little bit about the 2002 framework, but before we get into that, I just want to say that, when we can go to the next slide for the definition of quality. Quality is not a static goal, but it's a dynamic combination of consistent practices, clear expectations, and shared commitments, right? As I mentioned, it's the engine because it creates the specific conditions, structural, and the practices, safety, support, engagement, that allow youth to thrive academically, as Sandi mentioned, but socially and emotionally as well. And Sandy talked about this just briefly, but like intentionality is a core piece of all of this. Quality doesn't happen by accident. It's intentional. And like I said, it's rooted in the standards, approaches, and the specific practices that are employed in the field. And it also manifests in how adults, ideally in partnership with young people they serve, design experiences and shape the learning environment. And so, as with any set of standards, such as the California quality standards, which I think are really great. The purpose of those standards is to serve as a roadmap to achieve, to create those high quality developmental settings to guide continuous improvement efforts. And according to the California Department of Education, quality programs are student-centered, they're results-driven, and they complement, the regular school day. And so what I'd like to do over the next several minutes is just to unpack this a little bit, help you all think a little bit more expansive about quality, and provide just a couple of examples of what that can look like in practice. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, just a little bit more about origins. Deb did a great job of providing an overview of that and got into some depth, but just as a quick recap, the 2002 framework gave the field its first real shared definition of quality, largely centered on safety, structure, and of course, supportive relationships. Over the past 20 plus years, the field has recognized that, these basics were necessary, but not sufficient for equitable, meaningful learning and development for our nation's young people. And so, as you see here, the new quality measures for OST builds on that foundation, but reflects a bit more of a nuanced, equity-centered understanding of what young people need to thrive. And so, in our consensus study, we highlight two additional domains of program quality, that being culturally sustaining practices and critical pedagogy. I'll talk about that. And then honoring youth voice and choice. Also, notions of belonging and mattering are wrapped up in there. Those were in the old standards, but we've learned a lot more about them. And a lot of these program quality standards you'll see, support each other. So when you're thinking about creating a program, improving a program, these things overlap and interrelate. But again, the core goals of program of quality standards is to establish a baseline definition of program quality, provide a common language for programs, funders, evaluators to describe what quality means across diverse settings. And then really it's shifting the field from activities and supervision towards this intentional youth development. And so we can hop on to the next slide. So, kind of call this the path to youth thriving. It's really just a logic, for how we create quality systems and programs and continuously improve over time. So again, standards, they represent the core domains of a developmental setting, and a measure of quality. The indicators are the actual measurable metrics that allow us to drive continuous improvement. This is essentially your checklist, right? To catalog what's happening, what's not happening against what we should be seeing in a given program. And then the practices are the action. These are ideally the evidence-based actions we take daily to ensure we are meeting those standards. And one of the things that I'll just mention is, through all this work, there are so many great models out there and resources. And so I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel for you in any way here, but I just want to connect some of the newer science with the practice and the standards in California. So I'll just mention that California's continuous quality improvement cycle looks at this. They look at the indicators to identify gaps. So we're not just guessing what to work on, right? Has a set of indicators that are designed to close gaps that are identified during program evaluation. So, for example, and I'll talk more about youth voice and choice soon, if our indicators are showing that youth don't feel like they have a say in activities, that data point, that indicator tells us we need to work on the youth voice and choice standard. Um, Practices drive improvement. So once that gap is identified, we can review our practices and adjust or implement new ones. Or again, don't always reinvent the wheel. Go back to see what's there already in all the playbooks that exist as it relates to what I'll talk about in these three features here in just a minute. And what I said before, like there's a multi-level link to this, right? A key piece of this is to really link standards, practices at multiple levels, the programmatic level, so thinking about the policies, the staff level, the behaviors of the adults or near peers sometimes in this case, and the participant, the experiences. So, if a site coordinator sets a policy at that programmatic level, but the staff aren't using the strategies, for example, strength-based language, then the youth won't feel seen, valued, heard, respected. And that standard for supportive relationships as we work to create quality, positive developmental settings won't be there. So lastly, standards provide the clear expectations, indicators define measurable progress, practices provide the intentional design required for youth to thrive. Let's go to those three core features now. I'm sorry that some of that got washed out in the move over to Google Slides. But three core features of positive developmental settings that I really want to highlight today. One has been there for a long time. We've learned more about it. And then the other two that I really want to highlight, that being youth voice and choice, culturally responsive practices, and critical pedagogy. These features, like as I mentioned, don't exist in isolation. They're standards that directly impact the student experience and kind of are looked at and should be kind of designed holistically. So, for instance, you're not going to have authentic youth voice without a foundation for supportive relationships. So, when you think about making improvements in how you embody these practices in line with these features, it's just important to keep in mind that they should build off one another to create those high quality environments where youth can thrive. So before we go to the next slide, just for each of these three areas, I'll let you know that I'll briefly mention the indicators, some of them not being exhaustive here. And then I just want to highlight a couple of basic practices, and in some cases, just a case example to illustrate for you what quality can look like in these domains. Next slide. All right, supportive relationships. First of the three that I want to briefly cover with you today. These supportive relationships really foundational to high quality developmental settings, and they're characterized by adults building warm, trusting, developmentally appropriate relationships with young people that promote emotional safety, connection, and a sense of belonging. So some of those indicators are captured right in that definition. Again, interacting with youth in a warm, respectful way, showing patience, consistency, being emotionally attuned. And when you have that, you'll see that youth feel known, they're seen, they're valued by staff. They, for example, demonstrate comfort seeking help or support from adults. So you really see young people. In some cases, you'll have that quiet kid who stays in the corner, right? But coming out themselves and really feeling comfortable to express themselves and to really engage in the learning and developmental opportunities that are being ideally co-created with them. Next slide. So, talking about some practices. So to achieve this, staff again should be using warm, consistent greetings. They should be using strength-based language, active listening. So you're kind of hearing a lot of this happens at the staff level, not all of it, but this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. And so really training and professional development is key here around ensuring that these practices are not only present, but are consistently present for young people. And I think that word consistency is really key, especially for young people as they're entering, different spaces of learning and development. The ways in which staff interact with young people is a key driver to program and youth success. And so, we all kind of shared our stories at the beginning today and also in the chat. Just imagine being a youth and not having some of those practices present among the adults who are supposed to be guiding your learning and development. Are you going to show up as your best self? Probably not. And you don't need brain science, to know what's going on in someone's head, you can feel it. The science has just helped define it and codify it so we can improve our practice. Um, as I mentioned, youth who experience supportive relationships they will exhibit being known, seen, valued by staff. And this is really in pretty close alignment with California Standard 1 around safe and supportive environments, right? This is the nurturing side of it. Staff intentionally identifying participant strengths and interests, and maintaining that nurturing, supportive relationship. And so, like I said, as a result, you'll often see youth sharing responsibility for building a sense of community or demonstrating comfort, seeking help or support from adults. They're really making those really deep connections with the adult staff there. Let's jump over to youth voice and choice. And these last two are when I'll build out some case examples for you just to illustrate what that can look like in a extended learning or out of school time setting. So, what is youth and voice and choice? I mean, at the core, it's just young people having real meaningful opportunities. That meaningful piece is really important to influence decisions, express ideas, and make choices about the program, their learning and experiences in it, but also the environment within which they're learning. And those things are important. So again, kind of talking about the programmatic level here, but also the practice level. Um, when we talk about indicators, what we're really talking about is looking at a shift in power. Indicators where adults are sharing power appropriately, not over directing or over prescribing actions or ways of being. And when you think about youth feedback, like that should be visibly influencing the program. So, if you're collecting, for example, survey data or interviewing young people, whether it's at the beginning or the end or somewhere in the middle of your program, you should see some of those opinions, preferences reflected both again in the environment, but also in the direction of the programming. And this overlaps to a degree with Standard 4, the Youth Voice and Leadership standard for California, which mandates ongoing access to authentic leadership roles. But I think, we can extend this, a little bit further. I think access is not enough, right? We actually have to ensure that these things are happening. So, we can go to the next slide and I'll just keep talking here. At the programmatic level, this means providing space for youth to share concerns, interests to impact program policies, whether that's, the discipline policy. We see a lot of programs now implementing restorative practices rather than punitive practices because they've centered youth in decision making and they've allowed them to create what they feel is a really fair way to handle challenges that are likely to crop up in any program. Cell phone policy. Those are things that, we're dealing with in the traditional K-12 spaces. Those are things that young people should have an opportunity to have voice in as well. And it's really about the rules that guide behavior and interactions between and among adults and youth. So what I want to talk to you about for a minute here is that a lot of these things exist on a spectrum, right? So when you talk about a spectrum of youth involvement in decision making, you're going from one end where it's largely adult directed, maybe youth informed, what I kind of call light touch in this space, where adults are making decisions, occasionally asking youth for input. But youth feedback really is optional and not guaranteed to shape outcomes. There isn't really a well necessarily designed plan for how you're going to incorporate or center youth voice in your programming. On the other end of the spectrum, you have youth directed and youth governed. This is where youth are holding primary decision making power via youth councils, project teams, committees, and adults are serving as facilitators, not as decision makers. So one example of this could be staff designing semesters clubs, and this is on the left side, I'll call it the adult directed youth informed. The adults are designing the club's enrichment schedule. They're asking youth to complete a quick survey, but the results might or might not influence any adjustments they make to the programming or to the environment. So the adults are deciding the goals, the structures, the rules. On the other end of this, where youth are really centered and there's co-creation and youth empowerment in these programs, which I think I would say is the gold standard, although every program based on your goals will not necessarily want to go that far. That could be a youth leadership team or an advisory board where they literally have decision-making power. They're selecting the theme. They're even engaging in budget conversations. I mentioned rules around the environment, discipline, cell phone policy. But it's being really, again, intentional about how you are centering youth and the ways in which you are centering them in the programmatic, and also, what's going on in terms of the structures of the extended learning program. let's jump to culturally relevant practices and critical pedagogy. This one's pretty near and dear to me for some of the reasons I talked about at the opening today when I introduced myself, but also some of the work I still do with Black boys in primarily high schools. And one of the challenges, that we talk about is the lack of culturally relevant pedagogy, but also just engagement between adults and young people in the schools and ways in which we can do that better. So thinking about that in the out of school time, extended learning space. Culturally relevant practices, critical pedagogy, these are embodied by programs that are actively centering, honoring, reflecting, and sustaining the identities, cultures, and languages of young people through materials, interactions, and learning experiences. And then the criticality piece is really about helping young people think through real issues and examining power, identity, and equity, and really trying to connect that and embed that in whatever the learning is. And I'll provide an example for that in just a minute. So again, centering identity, this goes beyond simple inclusion, right? It's about actively centering and sustaining those identities, cultures, languages of young people. That could look like visible representation, right? So when we think about indicators, those could include program materials, visuals that are on the walls that reflect the diversity of the youth served. Um, this could be around making sure that youth's cultural knowledge and lived experiences are incorporated into activities, but also thinking around issues of bias, stereotypes, or exclusion that might exist within your space, and being very active in addressing those and making sure that however young people are coming in with whatever identities they have, that those things are respected and valued. And oftentimes that takes elevating the voices of young people, as I talked about that interrelation, to really identify that and make sure that those things are front and center in your program in the way that you structure it to support young people. We talked a little bit about the criticality indicators. So let's actually jump to, yeah, perfect. Thank you. Some of these things that you'll see in terms of practices, culturally sustaining practices, having community rooted projects and partnerships. If you are in a community with a number of folks who are multilingual, having multilingual routines and materials, but also allowing youth to do the storytelling and sharing about their culture. And as we think about critical pedagogy, I'm really trying to facilitate that dialogue that centers youth experiences and also questions power. I mean, we want young people to go out into the world and feel like they have agency, not only to just understand what's happening around them, but to feel like they can actually do something about it. So learning in this way centers that power and equity, those issues. And you can do that by creating projects that really drive people to analyze root causes, to explore multiple perspectives, or to engage in collective problem solving or action, right? And so adults are facilitating the inquiry, they're ensuring safety, but they're not steering the critical lens, right? They're letting young people really kind of own that. And so an example of what that can look like, first you need to create the structures whereby I think youth voice is elevated. I really think that's central. Talking about that overlapping holistic picture of how these quality standards, can interact. But let's take, for example, an extended learning program focused on improving math skills and literacy. So, youth might co-design a lesson and you've given them power, you've created an advisory board. You said, we want you to help us design a lesson that centers learning about correlations and percentile differences or ratios. And so they say, well, there's this big issue right now with data centers because that's something that's important to a lot of young people is issues around climate change. So they identify that as an issue, and you might co-design a lesson that examines how data centers are disproportionately built in low income and Black and brown neighborhoods, how that's contributing to air pollution because nearby power plants have to run harder to meet that electricity demand. And so students could work with real data, zip codes, median income, racial demographics, and calculate those correlations, those percent differences in pollution levels, those energy use ratios to really understand how local decisions can oftentimes create unequal environmental burdens. And then, if your program extends that far, if young people want to do that, they could turn it into a small project about what they can actually do with that, right? And that's that agency piece. That's that criticality, that's moving beyond critical consciousness to that critical agency. And so that could be something as simple as drafting an advocacy letter to the governor or the mayor of your town, or doing a presentation to the school or school district, right? And so you never know where this will go, or the spark it will ignite in young people when you connect what's happening around them to their learning opportunities. So that's just a little bit about what that could look like. I have a ton of resources on this. I have a nice little short list. So if you want that, I'll make sure that that's included in the slides before they release them so you all can dive into that. One more slide. This is just going back to the goal, right? Sandi talked at length about this, and so did Deb. It's really about ensuring that we have not just a system, a set of programs, but a system that is continuously improving and is heading towards achieving those kind of high quality standards, right? That lead to these essential developmental outcomes that the research is confirming around persistence, resilience, social skills, pro-social behavior, and then some of those more academic ones, the attendance, the graduation, the college attendance. And I think really foundational to any of this is creating those sorts of programs where young people are engaged. Once you get them engaged, this is when the magic really happens. So thank you.
You're all doing exactly what I thought. Let's give some appreciation to all three panelists through the emojis and chats and expressions. I feel like I should have a bucket for just to dump all the knowledge from each one of you in your presentations. Deborah taking us back through time, and walking us back through the the bad dreams and nightmares we sometimes have thinking about stuff that was going on 20 years ago. Sandi, UC Irvine has always been on the cutting edge of looking at this longitudinal research about it's so rich to see what's happening with 26-year-olds based on some of their experiences when they were young, and also this probably some of the more sophisticated integration of the youth development approach compared to what's going on in K-12 education. You mentioned so many people in your school of education studied in K-12 education. And Horatio centering youth voice in such a meaningful way and culturally responsive work with very meaningful examples. Lots of thoughts going through my head, but I just, again, encourage, 40 years ago, encouraging people from the chat to put questions in, but I'm curious. I'm going to go back to the No Child Left Behind era when I was trying to run these programs at APGA Middle School in the west side of San Francisco. And they told us back then, the most important thing you can do is align with the school day. And the most important thing you can do is ask the school what they need you to do. And so we did that. And the school told us, well, what we need is for you to provide some intensive tutoring to those kids on our DNF list. We're going to get all the kids on our DNF list and we're going to make them go to your after school program for the first hour and you're going to do intensive tutoring, homework assistance with them. And well, that's what we did. And it was when I took some folks from an organization called California Tomorrow through a site visit and I started showing them these classrooms of kids with D's and F's. What a wonderful way to be invited into your after school program, right? You've got a D and an F. And so, well, I was brought these people into this classroom and saw kids disengaged, saw kids sleeping, saw staff in the front. Nothing about it was good. And I was just, when I showed these people what we were doing and saw it through their eyes, I was embarrassed. and new things had to shift. And so this is early 90s. We kind of blew things up and got kids involved, just like you were saying, Horatio, got the kids involved in planning. And lo and behold, they wanted a DJ club. Lo and behold, they wanted a hip hop club. They wanted a movie making club. They wanted a theater club. They wanted robotics. We put all that into place and went to 250 kids a day with a big, long waiting list and fierce criticism from the school. Why is this boy in your DJ club when he hasn't done my homework assignment yet? And eventually we knew we had to do something to explain our theories and our approaches to the K-12 system because they didn't understand it. And so we actually worked with Sam Pehoff from Community Network for Youth Development and put together a publication called The Best of Both Worlds, Aligning Academic Standards and Youth Development Principles, and wrote chapters on every one of our project-based clubs and what the intentionality was about the learning. But I'm actually going to pose a question for us to talk about together from each of your unique perspectives. You know, here in California, especially, the $5.7 billion of funding is all tied to the public education system. And so I know there's people here in the academy and people that will be watching this recording, uh, maybe for years to come, are daily faced with a similar circumstance that I faced in San Francisco, that the K-12 system doesn't take us seriously, doesn't understand our intentionality, doesn't understand our rigor. And of course, we've seen at some point during COVID when we saw our community educators were the first ones to go back into the communities and support families. We saw examples of community educators working with certificated teachers and finding a little bit more respect for each other, going both ways. Us expanded learning snobs, we kind of look down at K-12 teachers because they're just like, all the narratives. But I'm just curious, just to open it up and see what you're seeing in terms of this science that we've been talking about in the youth development and the research, and what we're seeing in terms of the relationship with K-12 educators, and are we seeing some movement? What are your thoughts?
I'll go first, but I'll be brief. First, I can't throw shade on school day educators because I'm married to one. He's a high school art teacher. And I have found a few things to be true. I too am uncomfortable with the distinctions made from both parties. And the sooner that we can acknowledge that each brings something in that broader ecosystem to a young person's life, the better we can collaborate and coordinate. Now, Michael, you mentioned No Child Left Behind. And as you all now know, I love taking cues from history like sociologists do. And No Child Left Behind started as a civil rights movement. I mean, it really has an interesting history. But in the end, we know it catalyzed a lot of behaviors that were not intended by the original advocates for it, pushing both school day professionals and out of school time professionals to be most focused on grades and test scores, perhaps even deepening the divide. I have found in my personal experiences in the places I get to hang out that one is we now have so many more educators who have connected how we connected at the beginning of this session because they had an out of school time experience, a positive out of school time experience. So they better understand the opportunities and benefits than perhaps their predecessors. So we can come together around that shared experience. And that's intro that I did here, I do everywhere with every audience, policymakers, educators, the juvenile justice field. We can all come together around what is now a much more common shared experience. I have also found that for those that are inspired by research, it's not everyone. Some are inspired by stories, like we started, and some are inspired by research. That now the research is so much stronger, again, thanks to our colleagues and others here, that we have a much clearer story to tell, in particular as to how can we complement what is happening in the school day. There's so much that we want to do to wrap around ourselves and our colleagues and our partners and young people that it can't all be done in one setting. And out of school time is one part of that. So also not kind of getting into those turf wars, so to speak. But I tend to be glass half full, so I'll pass it to my colleagues.
I'll be relatively brief, and maybe Michael knows more about this than I do for the California context. But in my current role, I often talk with gubernatorial staffers, sometimes governors, and right now, as we know, there's 36 governors races happening right now. So there's a lot of candidates and staffers that we're talking to, and I talk to them about out of school time, youth development a lot. And I think, and this actually goes to a question that I'll touch on that's in the chat in just a second. But there is still, I think, a lack of knowledge among certain policymakers and politicians around the evidence around out of school time and youth development. And so part of this really is just continuing the education, and that's part of our role, mine, Deb, and Sandy's around what we know about the outcomes related to youth development. And so that's just part of the work. I think, like I said, outside of California, there are sometimes challenges, but there's also been significant investment in the out of school time space in many states over the past several years. So I think there are definitely opportunities for this to continue to grow. And I think the more that we do talk about it and advocate for these things, more likely we're to see them taken up. Which just points to a question that I responded to in the chat. Someone asked, Jessica, thank you for asking this, how do we get critical pedagogy and culturally sustaining pedagogy on our California quality standards? And I said, and I'll kick this one to you, Michael, but I said he could probably unpack the specific process for adoption, but advocacy is often the best route. Bring the folks together in this room who care about that, who see the value in it, who understand the emerging evidence, and push your state leaders on this, right? Cite the emerging evidence, let the youth tell the story of how these approaches have helped them. These sorts of campaigns and conversations are really how you can move the needle.
Yeah,
Thank you, Horatio. Go ahead, Sandi.
I'll just add a little bit. And I am more like seated in like the realm of research. So I don't have the wonderful practice and policy experience that Horatio and Deb have. But I think some of it is, it's related, this comparison is things are getting pushed out. It's like after school is flexible, which is great, right? It was so helpful during COVID, and it's changed over the years in terms of its function and its purpose, and that's wonderful. And it's because of its flexibility that we can do things like Horatio talked about, right? Like going with youth voice, what's their interest, and following that. And that's so helpful for youth. But I also think then when things get pushed out of school, they go to after school, or some people talk about extending, just even, extending the school day. Right. And it's different. And so there's actually this cool study where somebody looked at, are you motivated to be there? And then are you concentrating? And you need those two things to learn. And so, and he asked kids that when they were at an activity or doing a hobby, when they were in class and with their friends. So when they're with their friends, they want to be there, but they're not concentrating. When they're in class, it's the opposite. They don't want to be there. Right, but they're concentrating. It's only in hobbies and after school activities where you get both. And so I mean, and also like 85%, it's around there of use waking hours. When you look at the amount of time they're awake during the day, 85% is actually spent outside of school. Now, it's doing a variety of things, but there are so many aspects that are cool or unique about after school. So I think this comparison to school comes up in part because of funding, in part because of what's happening to school, and kids need this. So let's push it on after school. And also, parents, I know from running programs, like if parents are working, it's great when my kid would come home and have their homework done. So I think there are a lot of pressures for this, but, and, like when I talked about the academic outcomes, to understand is after school always helping kids academically? That is an important outcome, but they're doing you all are doing so much more for kids. And for example, there was another study where kids were on the path to not graduating in high school. And if they participated in an activity that they loved, and it didn't matter what it was, if it was band, it was sports, it was whatever, those kids graduated. Why? I bet you they didn't have the qual data, but I bet you it's because they didn't think much of themselves at school. And now after school gave them a purpose. It gave them a place. It gave them an area of their life where they felt good about themselves. And so I think embracing being loud, I'm a very loud person, being loud about the wonderful aspects of after school, but then also like really leaning into where and how does after school shine is what I would say.
Sandi, thanks for bringing that back. I remember maybe from Deborah Vandell, your colleague, that this notion of kids concentrating during school but not wanting to be there, and when they're hanging with friends, wanting to be there and not concentrating, but expanded learning doing both. I think that's something, and back to you, Horatio, that's in a high quality program. We still have those places where unfortunately the staff might be on the cell phone and the kids playing dodgeball, and that's a different thing. But I yeah, I think Jeff, I saw you put together a question that I'm not going to read it out loud, but I'm going to invite you to come off mute, Jeff Davis, and bring your question to the panel.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thanks, team, for such an amazing presentation. We often times shorthand, right, in that hour and a half with love as a research-based approach. But we look at the quality standards, right, as this foundation for children and youth to thrive. And we look at California's investment in expanded learning is happening at such a scale that we're now looking into expanded learning as a platform for partnership as part of a broader education, health, and human services ecosystem. And you can kind of see that I've attached an image there that can give you an idea of sort of the kinds of things and opportunities that we see are possible before school, after school, over 9-hour days in the intersession and in the summer, and really a 9-hour school day all year long, right? That the expanded learning resources provide. And then it also creates all these incredible opportunities to braid. You see Danielle Prince in the chat there talking about like, oh, have you thought about tapping into some of the mental health funding and things of that nature? So this is, and I know that Deb, you mentioned on the onset, sort of cheekily, like, well, we have to talk about this broader ecosystem, right? But we really are talking about it, and we're trying to reach out across sectors, help people understand the opportunity that is expanded learning as a platform for this broader ecosystem. And while we have your expertise here, I'm wondering if you have any guidance for us as we seek to create this ecosystem plan for expanded learning.
Well, far be it for me to school the experts on this, but even though I may have been cheeky about it, it was a really serious finding in the report. The report could have been, and we actually kind of messed with this a little bit. Quality and intermediaries, professional learning and intermediaries, supporting the workforce and intermediaries. So the role that conveners of and coordinators of ecosystems play is critical. It's foundation to ensuring young people have holistic pathways to thriving and their families in the communities in which they live. And I think we're seeing this over and over in place-based efforts throughout the country. And one of the things we're also seeing, and there's a forthcoming study coming out looking at this, a longitudinal study, is the role of out-of-school time intermediaries in those place-based systems as being really critical in implementing youth development principles into that work. And the tenets of high quality coordination of ecosystems are things that does, in my observation. They're creating open forums to share goals, to come to a shared vision. You know, we can get really stuck if we're not all ready to be in the same place, to being open to sharing resources. We know that capacity can be a real barrier to coordination and kind of addressing that head on. In Chicago, where I am, we need more professional learning for our after school professionals. And no one's going to get paid for it, but everyone's pitching in their resources to do a statewide training. That's just kind of an example of a resource light way to do things, or when things are maybe unequal from the resource front. I will always say data sharing is critical, but let's not let it get in the way, of doing good work. I've seen lots of coordination falter because it gets stuck on the complexities of data sharing, but let's make it be a goal. And I was talking to a great guy doing in Wayne, New York, doing this work, and he clearly to me is leading the work. And I said, what do you do, Jay, to do this well? And he said, great humility. Everyone in the room thinks they're leading it. And I think that I've learned a lot from watching Jay work. He reminds me a lot, Jeff, of you and of you, Michael, in really a sincere openness to understanding the motivations of others one is hoping to partner with, and in sharing in those motivations to get to a shared goal or North Star. So these are not new tenets. You all in California study organizational change and development, Peter Senge and others, and these are really core to that kind of work. So I really appreciate what you all have already done, and I think in this moment of more maybe that, even though California, from everyone's eyes, seems very well resourced, I know it's still a time of scarcity from a federal perspective, especially for the many, many other systems serving children and families. So we have to enter as humans and with humility.
Deb, thanks for bringing Peter Senke's name into the work. We've
Hard not to.
had some type of partnership directly with Peter Senge and his colleagues for nearly 10 years now. And one of the things that Otto Scharmer and so many others, and I was actually just thinking of something out of the fifth discipline as a question for each of you to close, which is one of the laws of the fifth discipline, Peter's book back from 1994, I think, was the importance in finding the greatest point of leverage. That in systems work, some of the hardest work is to find that greatest point of leverage where you could really move a system towards deeper quality. And usually the greatest point of leverage is very difficult to find. And it's a very precise point. I'm just wondering if each of you could speak to the participants here, those people watching, those people that will watch this recording, if you have an opinion on what might be, in your opinion, the greatest point of leverage in this moment in time, in out of school time and expanded learning, to move the needle towards quality, even deeper quality.
Horatio, do you want to go first, or I can jump in? You talked about quality, so
Yeah, no, go for it, Sandi. I'll jump in.
Okay. I would argue, well, I don't know. First, I would say there's probably not just one, right? But I think one of the bigger ones is going to be the youth and the family. And I don't know if people often think about those. I don't know if those were actually in our systems graphic that we have in the report, but I've seen it. I've talked to kids when youth are not talked to, and leaders have good intentions of being responsive, and they're completely unresponsive to the kids, and then they quit and they leave. And so they are a necessary voice. And if you really want those outcomes we were talking about, and Horatio talked about it a lot, I mean, they're core to quality. And so are their families. We're serving the youth and their families. And sometimes they don't always have the same goals or the same perspectives on what they're looking for in the program, but they can do a lot. They have a lot of strength. They have a lot of ideas, and the youth are yearning to be heard and to be integrated. Like when I talked about my kids, they were swimmers for years. And then they came back as like coaches and like junior coaches and interns and helping. And so, and then that led to summer jobs for them. And so, and there were aspects they didn't enjoy about coaching little kids when the little kids didn't want to swim, but they learned so much. And so I think harnessing the power of youth and their opinions, it would be, I think, have a huge impact. And I think it's necessary, particularly if you want to do the culturally sustaining, culturally responsive type of practices. So, and someone asked about quality with the 12 standards that CAN has. It is, I think, implicit in diversity, access, and equity. That's one of them. But I actually think what Horatio talks about is, and I like it there, but I think you also have to embed it in all the other 11 standards and think about how do you make this happen in all of, like, in youth voice and all of this kind of stuff. So again, that's really targeting those youth and seeing what they want and their opinion on how to skill building, youth voice and leadership, active and engaged learning, all of that stuff. So
I don't know. That was wonderful, Deb, and that's a lot of what, or Sandi, sorry, that's a lot of what I end up talking about is centering youth and that cultural relevance. But I think a big part of that, like you said, is thinking about how these different quality standards relate to each other and ways in which you can kind of leverage those. But I'll just very briefly go in a different direction. I think the adults within the system are really important too, especially those who are directly engaging with young people. So, for me, I think really trying to prioritize at a systems level, but also at a program level, professional learning, right? That focuses in on, some of those quality dimensions. Again, you're not going to be able to hit all of those in any one year thinking about how you improve a program, but really just think about, one area where you might have a deficiency or really recognize that growth is needed, and really hone in on the professional development piece of that. And I think Sandi mentioned something that's great, like find ways to bring young people and keep them connected to the program, because that's one way that one supports the program, makes it a little bit easier for the adults in the space to run the program, but also you're starting to create that pipeline early on, as we talked. Deb talked about being in the field for 40 years and returning to it, and I'm here too, and there's a lot of other folks in this room, I'm sure. So, thinking about the adults in the room, but then also ways in which you can keep young people tied to these programs and to this field, to help create that pipeline.
Thank you, Horatio. Deb, last word.
Yeah, it's the workforce. It's the youth work professionals. Hands down, we did a survey of almost 10,000 youth work professionals called The Power of Us. California was the #1 state in responding, so thank you very much. And we heard clearly that youth work professionals come and stay. in the job for purpose and passion, and they want to stay. They don't see it as a one-stop on their longer journey. And until we concretize, I don't want to say professionalize, because I truly believe we're all professionals, but until we concretize the labor category and allow staff to organize the way they need to compensate them in alignment with their contributions, and recognize professional pathways that allow us and them to progress, we will keep relying on, a workforce that, not because they want to, but because they have to move on, and keep revisiting the same questions over and over. So this to me is a very clear answer.
Well, I want to take a minute to just offer gratitude for each one of you, and not only your time to be here, uh, but the deep richness of what you share. I'm actually um, been thinking a lot in the last several months, and even more as I'm thinking about some things coming up. Um, I'll just say it, the spiritual aspect of this work. And I'm hearing that. I'm hearing that today. And the deep commitment to love and nurture young people, to love and nurture our staff, and to be serious enough about it to study it and back it up with data and facts. This is all spiritual work to me. So thank you for bringing your hearts and spirits here today, and much appreciation. I'll turn it back to Melissa.
Thank you, Michael. All right, one last time. Let's just show some extra love and gratitude to Michael for orchestrating this wonderful panel today. Thank you to Deb and Horatio and Sandi for a wonderful panel sharing your immense work. I'm like at a loss of words right now. So just really appreciate your time and effort and presentation that you put together for us today. For those that weren't able to make it, we will have everything's recorded, and so we will definitely be sharing this on all of our social channels, so that way folks can experience this presentation, because it was definitely a great one. So thank you again for being here. Just a few reminders as we close out our first spring 2026 Expanded Learning Academy workshop. I know this was dropped in the chat, but again, for anyone that's new or newer to the system, or doesn't have this, the system of support, the SSCL, is here to support our field. And so you can scan this QR code. We'll drop a bit.ly in the chat, so that way you can stay connected to your teams. If you are not already, we encourage you to sign up for CAN's newsletters and other communications. This is a great way to stay connected with the content for today, all of our newsletters and whatnot. So you can scan that QR code. We'll also drop the link. It's also listed in your learning guide today. And so at the very last page, there's key resources about expanded learning and resources from CAN. And you can stay connected. This takes you to our link tree to stay connected on all of our socials, especially YouTube. This is where all of our recordings will live on YouTube, and then we'll add it to our website. So just making sure everyone has access to all the things to stay connected. And then, of course, because we believe in CQI, continuous quality improvement, we encourage you to give us your feedback on our workshop today. So you can scan the QR code. We'll drop the bit.ly in the chat in just a moment, and we'll take just a few minutes to get your feedback. It should take maybe 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. You don't have to complete it. Well, we hope you can complete it now. Give us that feedback. Once you hop off, then it's out of sight, out of mind, and we really want to have your feedback. So We'll just wait maybe 30 seconds, give you a little time there to give us your feedback. And then we'll move on to a few last slides. Again, your data, your voice becomes the data that drives how we improve our academies and our overall statewide convening and events. And just double checking that that link is in the chat for our participants to complete our feedback form. Great. Thank you, Malia, for dropping that in the chat. So we're just taking a few more moments to give us your feedback on today's workshop. Oh yeah, for those of you that stuck around, zot. Did I even say that right? Okay. Is the noise made by the anteater? Oh yes, the anteater is the mascot for UCI Irvine. Trivia question for all the trivia ones. If we forget, Sandi, you can be a lifeline and you'll remind us what
There you
thoughts.
go. The more interesting one is the banana slug, which is at UC Santa Cruz.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
All righty. Thank you everyone for taking a few moments to give us your feedback. I'm going to move forward. Thank you for joining our Academy workshop today. As a quick reminder, the workshop recording and resources will be uploaded to the website within 24 to 48 hours. We will be adding some of the resources that Deb, Sandi, and Horatio mentioned in their presentation into our slide presentation. So that will be final in PDF on our website also within the next 24 to 48 hours. So have a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you next week as we continue with our Spring Academy. Take care, everyone.